The Interstellar Academy of Sciences was the most prestigious learning institution in 7 star systems. It had educated senators, admirals, xenobiologists, and 3 sitting Galactic Council members. Its halls were carved from imported moonstone, its classrooms hummed with ambient learning frequencies, and its students represented 42 different species from 31 different worlds. And then there was Saria. She had arrived 6 months ago, fresh off a colony transport from Earth, a planet the Academy's intake form had flagged, as it always did, with a small orange warning symbol and the words, Origin World, Classified Deathworld, Tier 4. The intake coordinator had personally reviewed her file 3 times, convinced there was a processing error. There was not. Saria was 18 years old, 167 centimeters tall, and had spent the first 12 years of her life on a rural settlement in what humans called the American Midwest, a region of Earth that, by all xenobiological accounts, should have been uninhabitable. She had hiked through forests that contained creatures capable of killing beings twice her size. She had survived a winter cold enough to kill most Academy students in minutes. She had helped her father pull a broken tractor out of a ditch during a lightning storm. She smiled a lot. That was the first thing the other students noticed. The second thing they noticed was that the smile never quite reached her eyes when someone tried to intimidate her. Draxen was the third thing they noticed, because Draxen was impossible to miss. He was a Vorkai, which meant he stood 2.5 meters tall, had 4 upper limbs, a hide the color of polished obsidian, and a natural set of bioluminescent threat displays built into the ridge of his collarbones. On his home world, the Vorkai were apex predators. The Academy had accepted him on a partial scholarship for applied physics, but Draxen had spent most of his first year establishing something far more important to him than academic excellence. He had established the hierarchy. It was subtle, at first. A look here. A shoulder check in the corridor. A comment during seminar that made the smaller students go quiet and fold inward like paper. The faculty noticed but said nothing. Draxen's family donated significantly to the Academy's research wing, and besides, there were no explicit rules against presence. Draxen radiated presence the way a star radiates heat. He had tried it on Saria twice in her first week. Both times she had looked at him with those flat, patient, brown eyes, said sorry, what, in a tone that implied she genuinely hadn't processed a threat, and then gone back to whatever she was doing. He had not known what to do with that. So he escalated. The incident happened in Professor Kelletha's Advanced Materials and Stress Physics class. It was a lab session. The students had been issued sample blocks of compressed xenoalloy and were tasked with calculating theoretical fracture points using instruments provided at their workstations. It was delicate work, the instruments were calibrated for precision, and the correct approach was methodical. Draxen sat 3 workstations down from Saria. He had been watching her for most of the session. She worked with the quiet efficiency that had started to irritate him on a level he couldn't quite name. No wasted motion, no second-guessing, just steady and calm and unbothered. The other students near her had noticed it too. A few of them had started sitting closer to her than they used to. That was the part that bothered Draxen most. He reached into the side compartment of his workstation bag and removed the blade. It wasn't a weapon by Academy standards, technically. It was a Vorkai clan tool, a flattened piece of high-carbon alloy with a worn grip, used traditionally for material splitting in industrial contexts. But it was long, and it was sharp, and when Draxen set it on the surface of his workstation with a deliberate clack and looked across the room at Saria, every student in the class heard it. The room went very quiet. Professor Kelleth looked up from his desk at the far end, noted the object, and made the small miscalculation of deciding to observe before intervening. Draxen picked up the blade. He turned it slowly. The bioluminescent display along his collarbones flickered to life, a deep, pulsing amber, the Vorkai color of active threat signaling. Several students near him leaned away instinctively. A plethora student at the back of the room made a sound like a pressurized valve releasing and went completely still. Draxen looked at Saria. Saria looked at the blade. Then she looked at Draxen. Then she smiled. It was a slow smile, and it started at the corners of her mouth and moved upward, and something about the exact quality of it made Draxen's threat display flicker uncertainly. Because it wasn't a nervous smile. It wasn't a diplomatic smile. It wasn't the kind of smile someone produced when they were trying to look calm while secretly calculating an exit. It was the smile of someone who had just been handed something familiar. "Can I borrow that for a second?" she asked. The room held its breath. Draxen, operating on some instinct he couldn't quite override, held the blade out. Saria stood up, walked the 3 workstations over with the same unhurried stride she used to walk everywhere, and took the blade from his hand. She turned it over once. She ran her thumb along the flat of the edge, testing the alloy's surface tension with the practiced ease of someone who had done exactly this many times before. "High-carbon construction," she said, half to herself. "Manual wear pattern on the grip, this has been used a lot. Good balance." She glanced up at Draxen. "How old is this?" Draxen stared at her. "It was my grandfather's. Good steel." She nodded with what appeared to be genuine respect for the craftsmanship. Then she looked at the xenoalloy sample block on her workstation, looked at the blade, and looked at Professor Keleth's assignment on the display screen. "Professor," she said, "the instruments they gave us are calibrated for compression testing, but the problem is asking us to measure shear fracture points. Can I use this instead? I think I can get more accurate preliminary data with a manual strike test." Professor Keleth opened his mouth. Then closed it. He started. "The assignment specifies?" "The assignment says determine the fracture point," Saria said pleasantly. "It doesn't specify method. And the compression instruments have a margin of error of about 4% on this alloy type. I checked the spec sheet during setup. A controlled strike on the fault axis should give me a cleaner result. I'll document the methodology." There was a very long silence. Keleth looked at the blade. He looked at Saria. He looked at his assignment rubric. "Document your methodology carefully," he said finally. "Always do," said Saria. She went back to her workstation, set the blade at the precise angle she'd calculated, and struck the xenoalloy block with a single, controlled motion. The block split cleanly along the fault line with a sharp crack that made half the class flinch. She picked up the larger piece, examined the fracture surface, and began writing her results. Then she walked back to Draxen's workstation and set the blade down in front of him. "Thanks," she said. "Really good weight distribution on that. Your grandfather knew what he was doing." She went back to her seat. The room remained very quiet for another few seconds. Then, one by one, students began returning to their work, though most of them kept glancing between Saria and Draxen with the careful, sidelong attention of beings trying to process something they didn't have a category for. Draxen stared at the blade in front of him. His threat display had gone completely dark. After class, a Salian student named Voss, small, 6-limbed, perpetually anxious, caught up with Saria in the corridor. "That was," Voss started, then stopped. "How did you do that?" "Do what?" Saria adjusted her bag strap. "He was threatening you." "The blade, the display, that's a Vorkai active threat sequence. Most beings freeze when they see it. You just..." Saria thought about it for a moment. "I grew up on a Deathworld," she said. "We have bears." Voss processed this. "What is a bear?" "Big animal. Claws, teeth. Comes at you sometimes." She shrugged. "You learn pretty fast that if you panic, it goes worse. And if you show it something it doesn't expect, if you change the frame of what's happening, sometimes it just doesn't know what to do with you." Voss looked back toward the classroom. "But the knife." "The knife," Saria said, "was a good knife. Somebody put real work into making it." She started walking again. Draxen didn't make that knife to threaten me. He made it mean something to threaten me. That's different. And if you treat a threat like a tool, sometimes the person holding it doesn't know how to keep threatening you with it. She paused, then added. Also, we had a lot of knives at home. My dad collects them. I've been handling blades since I was 8. She smiled, the real kind this time, the one that reached her eyes. Some things just aren't as scary as people think they are, she said. You just have to grow up around them. She walked on down the corridor, and Voss stood very still for a moment, watching her go, and thought. That planet must be absolutely terrifying. And somewhere back in the classroom, Draxen sat quietly at his workstation and looked at his grandfather's blade and thought, for the first time in a long time, that he might have miscalculated something important.